Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, do we have regrets this evening?
We have regrets this evening from Councillor Sandhu.
Thank you. Council, by show of hands, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, there are no declarations. Council, would two of us like to move us into Committee of the Whole with a motion and a seconder? Councillor Lischina and Councillor Giddings, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion carries. Council, the first two items on our agenda this evening are consent items. May I have a motion for the consent items? Councillor O'Meara, perhaps? Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Any objection to the consent items? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the consent items are adopted. That brings us to our first public hearing item, which is the public meeting and recommendation report for the temporary use zoning bylaw amendment for 2512 Old Brownie Road, otherwise known as the Palermo Pub. And given today's announcement by the province about moving us back into the color-coded framework, where it looks like we might be headed for red, which would allow them to be open but need this amendment in order to be open. That's the purpose of this thing. Councillor Ilger.
Councillor Longo and I have talked about this and discussed it, and we're willing to move the recommendation. I think it's a reasonable recommendation, and we can't see any problems unless there's somebody in the general public that would like to speak to it tonight. We'd be pleased to move it.
Thank you, Councillor Ilger. If there is anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, you can call 905-815-6095 so that we can connect you to the meeting, and then you would be called upon to speak. We have no registered delegations on this matter. And we'll take a pause for a couple of minutes here to see if anyone does want to call in. I'll just say that phone number and the same announcement applies to the next item as well in this meeting. And that is, I'll just repeat the whole thing. If you're watching the live stream on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, all you have to do is call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. Thank you. Madam Clerk, has there been any calls on this item?
No, there have been no calls for this item.
Thank you. I'll take the motion from Councillor Elgar and ask if there's any objection to the motion. Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Thank you, Council. I know this will be important to the family that runs the Palermo Pub. That brings us now to item number 4 on our agenda, the public meeting and recommendation report for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for the Town of Oakville former public works site. And you have a memorandum from the Planning Services Department that was distributed before the meeting. And once again, I'll announce that if you're watching the live stream of the meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, all you have to do is call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting and you can speak when we get to your turn. We do have a registered delegation from Wanda. Oh, we have 2 registered delegations, one of whom I can name to give her the reassurance that she's lined up, and that's Wanda Crichton, and the other one is?
Cairns.
Mike Cairns is our other registered delegation. If we give our attention now to Gabe Charles, he will walk us through a presentation on this matter and place it in the context in which it sits. Mr. Charles.
Is a public meeting as well as recommendation report for the former public works site, Parcel 7, which is at the northwest corner of Trafalgar Road and Glen Ashton Drive. As council will recall from the master plan exercise that we had undertaken in 2018, we had looked at a comprehensive redevelopment scheme for the entirety of the public works site. And there's some benefits to looking at that, namely along Trafalgar Road, it is identified as a future bus rapid transit corridor. And it is a site overall, which is just over 7 hectares, but the property in particular that we're looking at tonight is a little bit smaller than that. It's at 0.4 hectares, but the purpose of the master plan exercise was really to understand how we could look at the redevelopment of the whole of the work site in the context of the uptown, as well as in the context of the town's urban structure. So for a bit of context, this is a close-up of the public works site. To the north are a couple of pipelines, and to the west is the hydro corridor. And the area that we are looking at is shown here in red. So as council may recall from 2018, what the master plan identified was a comprehensive redevelopment of the entirety of the site. It proposed, in essence, a mix of building types from towns to mid-rise to taller buildings, as well as opportunities for bonusing on the site, as well as the extension of parkland just on the east side of Taunton there at the south end, and a mix of uses including the opportunities for retail and employment as well. And again, the site that we're looking at is just at the corner across from the recently constructed Stacktown product on the south side of Glen Ashton. What came along with the master plan was an official plan amendment number 25, which outlined a number of specifics just in terms of what we're looking at for heights as well as densities. Or sorry, not densities, but minimum number of units. So the minimum number of units over the entirety of the site is just over 1,200 units is expected, with a range of heights being possible. And the area that we're looking at has permissions of 4 to 6 stories. And in particular, there was a figure that was included in the official plan amendment which identified the 3 separate blocks. Parcel 7 that we're looking at is part of Block C, which has a minimum number of units of 150 for this particular area. The zoning bylaw may be a little bit confusing because it was a leftover from previous plans that we had in place which looked at the entirety of the site for mixed-use purposes. We had proposed, or sorry, not proposed, but brought forward some draft zoning regulations in 2018 along with the official plan amendment and the master plan to look at how the official plan could be implemented in the fullness of time. So what we're looking at right now is just look at the area that is in gray and just bringing forward the site-specific zoning just for that block in particular. The zoning that is in front of council, and as the mayor had pointed out, there was a memo that was provided which included some minor tweaks to the bylaw which we provided to council. And again, it builds off of what we had already started in 2018. It does permit on this site townhouses, stacked townhouses, as well as mid-rise development. These regulations are in conformity with what the parent zoning would be, and the purpose of this zoning is really to implement what council has approved in OPA 25 as well as in the master plan itself. The site specifics include or bring forward the same parking standard. It provides minimum, maximum heights. It includes setbacks to public right-of-ways. And again, it's furthering the official plan policy and the master plan. The recommendation before you, what I would note is number 3 is revised as had been identified in the memo, which is just to recognize the tweaks that we had made in the circulated bylaw just in the last couple of days. So, Mr. Mayor, if there's any questions to that, I'd be happy to answer those now.
Thank you very much. There I can see council. Questions? Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. There's a number of questions that came up from a couple of members of the public regarding things such as notice. Could staff provide information with respect to how notice occurs and why we have the notice provisions that we have, as well as our plans for the future to review our notice requirements?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Adams, for the question. The notice right now is in conformity with what the Planning Act regulations are. So we send notice to 120 meters around the property, as well as we put the notice in the Oakville Beaver to meet our requirements. The future, in terms of what we're looking at from a notice perspective, is council had asked staff to go back and look at how notice is working and how comprehensive that is. That is something that we'll be looking at this year and bringing back a recommendation to council.
And that's to occur, I think, is it late this year that we're expecting to see that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the timing eludes me right now, but I know it is this year at minimum.
Very good. There were a couple of questions that occurred late today with respect to the number of units that could occur on this particular parcel. I recognize that Section C is not larger than just the piece that we're looking at. Can you tell us what the expectation would be for this particular parcel, for Section 7?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the overall block, which includes both parcels 4 and 7 from the master plan, is 150 residential units at minimum. The mixed-use zone, as well as the urban core designation, which is what the property is designated, doesn't have minimums and maximums from a unit perspective. What we do is provide minimum maximum heights, and then we allow the development itself to have a mix of unit sizes. So there could be, if it's townhouses, they're generally larger units. With apartments, you could have smaller units as a result. And what happens from a zoning perspective is ultimately the parking ratios, because we have minimum parking ratios, those tend to regulate the full number of units that could be built. And really the developments are in response to what the market is looking for.
When I looked at our master plan concept earlier, I understood that with a 4-story townhouse format that there might be 48 units on this particular section approximately. And if we went to a 6-story format, it might be obviously more than that. Is that still approximately correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. Once you go to the apartment form, you could go up to probably double the number of units.
Okay, and is there any ability to have bonusing on this parcel of land?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no. We didn't include bonusing through this site-specific zoning bylaw.
And so what you see is what you get, so to speak, with respect to the zoning that would be being put on in place?
Correct.
Thank you. I think there's at least 2 delegations who I suspect will go through a number of similar types of questions. So I look forward to those questions or comments, and then perhaps I'll have additional questions after. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions? Shall I call the delegations? Madam Clerk, would you please call the delegations?
First delegation is Wanda Critchin.
Ms. Crichton, hello and welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Hello.
Hello, we hear you very well.
Lost my connection, so I didn't know if you were calling me or the other member of the public.
Well,
Thanks, Wanda Crichton. Am I to speak now?
yes, please. We're looking forward to your information.
Good evening, then. Mayor Burt and councillors, planning staff, and fellow citizens. The reason I wanted to speak to this was already alluded to by Councillor Adams. But I've previously come before this council and raised the whole issue of inadequate notice to citizens regarding all these zoning, bylaw, and development changes and applications. 120 meters. To put it in perspective, folks, we're talking less than the length of a Canadian football field. So surely a town that claims to be livable can do way better than that with the extent of the massive developments and these lands. Now, this zoning application perfectly illustrates my point. All the maps, which in fact Mr. McCabe just referenced, and that are included in Appendix A, B, and C, all show several streets on both sides of Trafalgar which are directly and materially impacted by the development of these lands. Yet no direct notice that I'm aware of was sent out, certainly not by me. I did request previously to know what addresses actually got a direct notice, and I have yet to receive that information. The reason this is so important is that selling these lands now and developing them now puts additional pressure on our already inadequate supports for citizens in this area. We have had no new libraries, no new rec centers, and no other similar supports for residents in North Wards 5, 6, and 7. This also adds to the pollution. The other thing about this is it's very piecemeal. I don't understand, unless there's a specific application that is currently underway, why this is being handled on its own. Should we not be handling the whole block? Specifically, I do have a number of questions. Number one, waiting until the end of the year to change how to notify and engage the public is inadequate, totally inadequate. All the remaining land will all have been decided on by then. I and many other citizens are only finding out now that these kind of decisions have already been made, and that's because of this 120-year notice. For example, I'm only finding out now that an amendment to the plans regarding these municipal lands was made in 2018, yet I'm materially impacted and I was given no direct notice of it. And that's happened all over Oakville, and people are getting angry about it. I'm sure you're hearing about it now in some of the other developments that are being proposed or underway. So what I'm asking council at the moment is this. I suggest you not be approving any rezoning or piecemeal rezoning of these lands or selling them until concrete work is underway to actually build the necessary rec centers, libraries, and other citizen supports that are needed for the already huge population we already have. These are all listed in the town plan, Mr. McCabe. There's no shovels in the ground. My second question is, did any citizens get direct notice of this bylaw zoning amendment? I'm not sure who did or didn't get any notice, and I'd like to know who did, and meaning the addresses that were notified. I don't know why this is such a difficult question. My third question has sort of been answered. Apparently bonusing can't apply, but I'm a little bit leery. The other question I want to know is, can an application be made for dwellings other than those stated? In other words, can somebody come in and say, nah, I don't want to build townhouses, I'd like to build a tower? And my last question is why does Appendix D mention apartment buildings when it talks about parking, when according to this report, you're only talking about townhouses? So it's unclear to me why Appendix D. My last question is, I just saw a slide whipped up that says there was a change in point number 3 circulated in the last 3 days. Clearly, I'm not sure what this change was or if it's material to these questions. So what I'm asking council is to put immediate action on a truly transparent and engaging notice policy that is consistent and adequately deals with the 21st century. We can't wait until the end of the year. There'll be nothing left in Oakville that hasn't already been decided on. Planners indicate they sometimes exceed the requirements, but to me that's inconsistent, lacks transparency, and really it should not be left to the whim of unelected planners. This should be directed by council. And again, I would ask the hold be placed on the sale and rezoning of these and the adjacent municipal lands until the new necessary supports are in place for citizens in this area. I would also ask that if we are having no bonusing on this part of these municipal lands, bonusing be removed from the rest. I'd like to be able to still look up in the western sky and not see a wall of towers. Right now, there's a monstrosity at the corner of Dundas and Trafalgar. Again, nobody knows, nobody hears about it, and things just proceed until it's too late. Well, it's not too late yet for this particular piece of land. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information. Madam Clerk, let me just check if council has questions for the delegation. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I just wondered if our delegation had actually been given a copy of the master plan from 2018. It wasn't clear to me if she had access to it.
I can answer that. You can call me Wanda. That's fine. Councillor, I did get a reply from Mr. McCabe on a couple of questions I had raised, and he sent me a link. That's how I found it. But my point is that when that amendment was made in 2018, again, materially and directly impacted, no direct notice. I don't get the beaver, so if that's your method of notifying people, I've said before, it's completely and woefully inadequate.
Thank you for coming out, and thank you for raising an issue that council has been aware of, but you've articulated it, the pain of it, quite well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Other questions? Ms. Creighton, thank you very much for your delegation. Councillor Adams, I think, has a question or not? Councillor Adams?
I don't have a question for the delegate, but I do want to make sure that the delegate stays online, because I do want to ask our staff if they could respond to some of the questions that she raised.
Councillor, now's the time.
Adams and council, shout out to my councillors in Ward 6.
Councillor Adams.
Can I go to our staff to ask some of these questions, or to have them follow up on some of these questions that were raised?
Yes, sir. I'm inviting you to.
Thank you very much. Then I'll ask our staff if they can clarify some of these questions. Some of them were in fact written to staff earlier, and so they would have had a written copy of it, and it is within the materials that was circulated to council earlier as well. So some of the questions I think maybe could be answered, and I think would help the general public in understanding the process. Could staff discuss the phasing process, and why not the entire block all at once right now, recognizing that the intent being to have the MBC work on the parcel?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The entirety of the site was not zoned at this time because it makes some sense that as different parcels are made available for sale, that the developers who were to develop those sites would come forward at that time with a rezoning proposal. The site that we're looking at right now, the rationale behind zoning this one first was to allow the Municipal Development Corporation the ability to have one parcel that it could sell sooner than later, and have zoning in place that is already in conformity with the official plan and in the master plan. Depending on how the MDC decides that it wants to phase the entirety of the site, it could make parcels available one by one, or it could do it all in one shot. It really depends on what the demand is in the market to redevelop the entirety of the public works site. But what does make sense right now, at least from staff's perspective, is to do them one at a time, and then once there's a proposal on each of the parcels, and the council would see the zoning at that time.
And with respect to this particular parcel being one of the smaller parcels and one of the more straightforward parcels, perhaps, that's why this one was chosen rather than one of the more complex parcels that would come at a later date.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. This parcel already is bounded by the pipelines, the hydro corridor, and two existing rights of way. whereas the balance of the site would more than likely have to go through some sort of either plan of subdivision or draft plan of condominium to create the individual parcels that would then be optioned for sale.
Great. And then, can you answer the question about the ability of this parcel to be, to have apartments rather than townhomes, and whether at a future date, another developer might come forward and make further changes to it?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the rationale behind doing this particular parcel at this time as well was that there was some certainty for council in terms of what would be developed on the site. So if a developer were to pick up this parcel or any other ones on the site and they wanted to do something which was beyond what the zoning already permits, then they would have to come back to council with a rezoning and a privately initiated application.
And would that be subject to some agreement with the MDC?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
And would that be subject to some agreement with the Municipal Development Corp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it really depends on how the MDC wants to structure any of these particular agreements. I won't speak on the MDC's behalf in terms of how they're going to do that. It could happen either through in partnership, it could be individualized, it could be the MDC leading it. So there's a couple of ways that it could move forward.
Okay, and I understand that that's to come still, so. And then we touched on this question about the notification earlier and which properties specifically were notified. So I recognize that we used a distance for the notifications. Can you tell us specifically that properties received a letter in their mailboxes?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we follow the notice requirements as they're provided through the Planning Act, and we would have mailed those notices to within 120 meters of the site. In addition to that, we put the notice in the newspaper as well.
So there were properties that were within 120 meters, and they would have received a notice in the mail.
That's correct.
And then the last question I'll ask you to clarify for us is the minor amendments or changes that are associated with Part 3 of the recommendation. Can you walk us through what those minor changes are?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. What we had clarified was the length of the main wall as it faces Glen Ashton and the indentations that could be made to that wall. So if I remember correctly, it was 65 or 75 meters originally, and we adjusted that now, and we required an indentation now in that main wall to help reduce, assuming that it's an apartment building that's built, to help reduce the massing of that along the street edge.
Okay, thank you very much. I recognize that there may have been some additional questions that were outlined by the delegate in writing. Some of them, I think, are not necessarily specific to this application, but are more general things, such as the issue around availability of rec centers and so forth. And so I'm not going to go through those specifically, but I think we can take those up at a later date. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Grant? Just unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just to, it's not necessarily pertaining to this issue, but pertaining to the comments raised by the previous delegate about the fact that we're not responding properly to, or not at least giving allowances to give notification to people properly. My concern is that she had raised two issues. One, that she didn't want to see a wall of buildings across the street from her on Trafalgar, and that she was upset about the idea that there's, buildings going up at Trafalgar and Dundas. I'm concerned that we're not telling people, or not communicating well enough with our community about the fact that we are allowing for larger buildings to go along Trafalgar, and then we have growth nodes, such as these large buildings going up at Trafalgar and Dundas, in order to protect the smaller communities, so we don't have any problems, like any larger buildings going up into the smaller communities, such as her road. It seems that people see these buildings going up and complain about them, but don't understand that these are growth nodes. These are areas where we're allowing growth so that we don't have to impact the stable communities that people live in. So I'm also concerned about the fact that if this is a concern that people are raising when we're talking about these issues, they may not completely understand our ideas as we are building out. So again, the notification that we send people may not be communicating that properly. And again, I realize it's not specific to this conversation, but it is specific to the issues raised by the previous delegation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. It may very well be fair to say that the role of the province's growth plan and how growth is rolled out across the province is poorly understood. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to, well, I guess first of all, I just want to clarify that I'm aware that notices were delivered on our side of the street. It was fine. I had several conversations with people that live in the townhouse complex along Taunton Road, as well as a number of the park residents, the folks in there 20 or more years forward to that property being developed. So I know those notices have been getting out there. I've been fielding some questions from them, and I just want you to be aware that we're getting them. I have a question for Mrs. Charles, specifically, and maybe you can't answer, maybe this has to go in camera, but I want to understand something about the potential of another developer coming forward and wanting some form of change, specifically on that site. Can you confirm to me that this zoning bylaw and official plan amendment is to conform with the anticipated development needs of that particular purchaser, and that is a condition of sale, that they can't come back and ask for additional changes? Is that accurate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware of any agreement of purchase and sale right now. I don't know the details of that. If there is one, that would be handled through the Municipal Development Corporation. What we were trying to do at this point by having the town initiated zoning bylaw before you this evening was to provide that measure of predictability in terms of what could be developed on this site to ensure that it was in full conformity with the official plan amendment that Council approved in 2018.
And I don't know if Sayo Closey or if maybe even yourself, Mr. Mayor, who serves on the MDC, can confirm that there is some form of condition connecting the sale of this property to this amendment. I mean, I do have concerns, and we've had this before, where we've had developers come along wanting to buy this land, and the plans were way outside of the context of all the planning done on this property for 25 years. So I'd just like some sort of assurance that that's in fact what the MDC has arranged.
Let me try to give some clarity to this. What Mr. Charles was trying to stress to council is that this zoning conforms to the official plan, and any application to change it would have to come back to council and would, because this zoning conforms to the official plan, presumably an application for more would be out of step with the official plan, and it would be technically required to also amend the official plan in order to get more. So in theory, in planning in Ontario, a person can always apply for more, but depending on what they're trying to do, the hill gets steeper and steeper as they try to go up that hill. And then for history, I'd like people to remember that before, 15 years ago, before many of us were on council, and certainly before I was, the town sold all of this land in one big block to one big developer. And I well remember that in my first month as mayor, that developer came to me and said, and I think they had some gigantic number of units put, the town, the council in that day, had put a plan on this land of 17 acres for well in excess of the 1,200 units that we're talking in terms of this master plan. I believe it might have been 1,800 units. The developer came to me, I think it was my first month, and said, we need an increase of 10% in units on this land. And I said, oh, well, are you going to pay the town 10% more than you paid it for what you got? And the developer said, no, we're not going to pay you anymore. We just want more units. And I said, well, then I'm not going to give you any. And he said, well, if you don't, I'll give the deed back and you'll have to refund our down payment. It turned out they hadn't actually paid the full purchase price. They'd only paid a small down payment. And I said, drop it off on your way out. It took him a year to realize that I wasn't kidding, and he did. So this property has a huge history. Everybody who's interested in it can, by the simple act of requesting to be on the mailing list, planning keeps a mailing list of people who delegate on a property and who are interested. And anyone in the public that wants to continue to watch the development of the old public works site, which is what this is welcome to sign up and to be included. But to your specific questions, Councillor, I've given you, I think, some pretty strong assurances that although in theory in Ontario you can always apply for more, in this particular case they can't get it unless council gives it to them. And if they want more than what our zoning allows right now, given that our zoning complies with the OP, if they're going to fail to comply with the OP, well, they're going to need an official plan amendment too, and that's a whole nother process. So I hope that helps establish some clarity, and I regret that how much time I took to explain that, but I hope it was helpful. Councillor Chisholm, did I raise more questions than I answered? Councillor Chisholm, before we come to you, we're going to finish with Councillor Knoll. Councillor Knoll, perhaps I didn't.
So your cautionary tale about the collapse of purchaser number 2 is one of the reasons that I'm concerned about this question. And I believe that I had insurance from the sale when we spoke about this, that there was a connection between the purchase and sale and the zoning. So I just wanted that, I would like to get that clarity that we're not going to get back. We're not going to end up passing this, selling it, and then fighting with our purchaser later on. And talking about history, this property, when I first, I largely won my seat at the time by attempting to derail the sale of this property to a giant lumber yard. So if you want a really bad use for that property, I won't mention the name of the company, but it was essentially going to be a giant home renovations lumber yard facility that was so completely congruent with everything we're attempting to do in Oakville. So I want to know that, I mean, one of the benefits of going through all these master planning processes and such was so we had some degree of comfort going forward when we did eventually sell and agree to development of the property. So I want to be able to get some degree of assurance here that whatever the outcome of the zoning is, that is what it's going to end up being. Because it's not a traditional arrangement. This isn't somebody coming along with property they already own and asking for zoning. We own this right now. We haven't actually conferred title on the purchaser. So do we have an ability to be able to say, no, you can't get more? I'm hoping maybe the CAO could respond.
Madam CAO, maybe we need the legal department to answer this question.
Mr. Mayor, I was going to say that the purchase and sale agreement is a report we were going to be bringing forward to council at the next meeting, and I think probably the questions are better addressed at that point in time. But I will also add that the process that we've undergone on the public works site has been an excellent process in terms of establishing clearly the expectations of the municipality in terms of its master plan, and then bringing forward a zoning bylaw at the same time as there is a development interested in the property, so that we're very closely matching what their expectations are in terms of what they intend to do with the property, with the zoning, which I think gives us a lot more certainty on the planning front that this site will be developed in accordance with the zoning that you have in front of you today.
That's exactly the assurance I was looking for. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right, there you go. Thank you. Councillor Chisholm, it's your turn, I think.
Just a couple of quick questions, and I don't know if Wanda's still with us, but a couple of things that she did raise, and I would like to have some information back from staff with respect to, I think the concern, if I'm not mistaken, she was concerned about the lack of facilities, recreation facilities in that area. Knowing full well on the, I'm going north, on the left-hand side, we have River Oaks Rec Center, and on the right is Fairport Ridge with the library. And those catchment areas, I don't know how big those catchment areas are, but also in the Parks and Recreation Libraries Master Plan, maybe Jay can answer this with respect to, is there anything in the designation with respect to growth of rec facilities in that area? Looking at just a broad brush, I don't see any space or green space or space available for any of those type of facilities. So I just need to have some, I guess, clarity on where we're going with that concern or that issue we can identified by Wanda. Thank you.
Madam
Mr.
CAO.
Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, of course, as council is aware, the demand for community spaces is set out through our master plan process. So we have identified the various community centers throughout the area. I would note that in this particular area, there has not been identified there has been identified a need for a library, but that's to occur in the north of Dundas. So that is a community need that we've identified, and in fact, we have a site that has been identified that has an opportunity for us to create that library space on it. Council had dealt with that last year, I think it was. In terms of park space, for example, we have quite a large memorial park that actually had been over-dedicated for that particular area, so we could achieve that park well before the development took place. And if you refer to the master plan components that Mr. Charles had presented, there are actually 3 parks that are shown in that master plan, one to the south, directly across from this development itself, just to the west, and then parkland within the center portion of the public works site. So it's been through those master plan processes that we've identified what are the needs for community spaces, and they are being addressed as development occurs and as funding, of course, is available.
Thanks, Jane. I guess the question really was bricks and mortar with respect to recreation facilities standing. So we'd like to have Fairport Ridge and we have River Oaks. What I'm asking, do those 2 rec centers in those areas, is the Trafalgar, Glen Ashton corridor there, is that a catchment area for those 2 rec centers?
Yes, Councillor. And there are 2 more community centers in the capital plan far out, as we look forward over the next 10 years in the development of North Oakville. There's a community center planned for Neagawa and another community center in the North Oakville East Secondary Plan for approximately Trafalgar and Burnhamthorpe. So, Council has a master plan that provides for all these facilities.
I just wanted to put that out there for so Wanda had some background information with respect to, because I think the concern that in her initial presentation, she had a concern about that. So I'm hoping that helps her out, assists her in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. You and me both. Madam Clerk, would you like to call the next delegation, please?
The next delegation is Mike Cairns.
Welcome, sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Hello?
Hello.
I'm through, I guess.
We hear you.
Great. Mike Cairns, thanks to Mr. Charles and Mr. Adams for the help for the last minute flurry of questions I had for them. I appreciate all that. I'm concerned. I don't know how valid it's going to be, but I look at the area I live and I see 4 corners at Glen Ashton and Trafalgar. And in the southeast, I have regular detached homes. The northeast has a pharmacy and some cooperative housing. In the southwest, there is a 4-story building, and further up in Ashton, row townhomes. Then in the north part, the proposal is not quite rigid as I understand it, because I checked something in the paper. Thank you very much for this help. I don't know what I have is valid or not, but what I have is page 52 of the master plan, parcel 7, for buildings with a total building height of 4 in each of the 2 units on part 7 there. Well, that seems just fine to me. It kind of balances out, kind of makes the whole thing sort of symmetrical. But 6 would be horrendous in there. It would just be an eyesore. It's going to be next to a parkette, just west of that. And there's a proposed taller building further north and east of the parkette. But there's, to me, the parkette with 4 stories around it is kind of okay. With 6, it's going to look grotesque. It's just disproportionate. It's going to be a jarring view to drive up Trafalgar or to walk across from Trafalgar. It kind of doesn't, from my perspective, blend in, make the whole area a whole. That's basically it. I understand the high rise coming there, and units coming there. I understand getting higher as you go up towards the main intersection of Trafalgar and Dundas. But I'm really unhappy with the idea of 6 stories facing me when I walk out to the drugstore or I drive along the street. If it be 6 stories further up, fine, or if there be something in between, fine. But it's, to me, it's too abrupt, too big a jump. That's basically all I wanted to say. Since I started looking at that, I've had questions and interest about the whole area, but that's nothing to do with today's debate. That's basically all I have to say.
Well, thank you very much. Council appreciates you coming and saying it. Councillor Grant?
I just want to clarify, the last delegation had mentioned that they're aware of high density, which is tall buildings along Trafalgar, across the street, I believe, from where they live. So I'm just wondering if 6 stories is too high. They're aware of the fact that there's going to be taller buildings along Trafalgar. What height is not tall enough, or what height is too tall?
I was going to say it's too high on control. I expect it to be 6 further up, 8, 9, 10. I don't mind. I anticipate that going up. What I don't like is the jump. Look at the whole corner. You've got family homes, story and a half, I think, pharmacy. You've got cooperatives, and one 4-story building on the southwest corner. It's not the 6 stories anyway. 6 stories right in that particular area, which puts the whole thing out of proportion. If it were 100 meters further north or whatever, it would be much less. If there were 4 than a 6, I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But 2 stories, 4 stories, and then the 6 right there, it just looks, to me, out of symmetry.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And again, to town staff, I would use this as a situation again where we need to point to the fact that we are not engaging our citizens enough in understanding the master plans for areas with the Trafalgar corridor or with our growth nodes. We need to be better able to discuss how the areas that get built out will look if they're not built out as of yet. Again, Trafalgar and Dundas, and in this case, the old public works lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams?
I just wanted to thank Mike for his delegation this evening and the discussion earlier. And Mike, thank you for referring to the particular page in the master plan. Just within that master plan, it does have reference to the 4 to 6 story on that block as well. So I appreciate what you're saying about your concern about the height, but it is within the official plan concept that is part of the master plan. So, thank you very much again for joining us this evening.
Thank you, sir. All right, Madam Clerk, I'm going to reserve, are there any other delegations? There being no other delegations, I'll confine it to table, and I'll look to council for a decision. Councillor Knoll.
Your Worship, I'd be happy to move the staff recommendation with the amendments as proposed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grant?
I was about to second it, but then realized that we're in public. It doesn't matter. So.
Quite so. Is there any objection to the motion by Councillor Knoll? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. We now have item number 5, the discussion item, which is the repeal of the bylaw 1991-074 for 1086 Burnhamthorpe Road East. You have the report from Planning Services Department. It's fairly straightforward. Planners are available if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll look for a motion. Councillor Duddick and Councillor Chisholm, are these questions or competition for a motion? Councillor Duddick wins the foot race to move it. Is there any question? Is there any objection to Councillor Duddick's motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the motion carries. Council, there are no confidential discussion items, but we do have the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee, and we need a motion to receive the minutes of the committee. Councillor Giddings, thank you very much. Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, the minutes are received. I wonder if one of you would like to give us a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, thank you very much. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1 and 2, public hearing items 3 and 4, discussion item 5, and advisory committee minutes item 6 as noted by the clerk. May I have a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Lischina and Councillor Grant, thank you. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, the report is adopted. Is there any new business of an emergency congratulatory or condolence nature, Council? Councillor Knoll.
Well, I say a big thank you to our Parks and Open Space team for, and I know that they've been developing these across the community, but I'm particularly thankful for ours. Our new skating pond, or skating base, I guess it's not really a pond, at Billbank Park. It has helped us a great deal in getting people off of stormwater management ponds, and this is a great way to stay off the stormwater management ponds, don't skate there, and use some of these great flooded rinks that our park staff have created. It's very popular, and we're very grateful to the team.
Thank you, Councillor. I do have a bit of congratulations to convey. The other night, I was able to join Councillor Giddings on his skating rink. And it might even, it's not the one that you're sitting in front of, is it, Councillor Giddings?
No, Mayor, it's not. This is Aspen Forest Park that I'm in front of right now, but I'll head over to Wallace Park shortly.
So I was able to join the councillor at his overnight work job, flooding the Wallace Park rink, and I was able to meet his diligent volunteer and comrade, Mr. John Kay, a retired town employee, and I got to watch the fine technique that's involved in this highly artistic endeavor. And you threw me, Councillor, because you had the picture previously of the skating rink in the park across from my house, so I didn't know you were doing that one too. Anyway, Councillor Dave and Citizen John made it look easy, if somewhat cold and late at night. And so this is, and I point this up because this is a safe alternative to going on those stormwater management ponds, or we've recently seen people jumping over running water on 16 Mile Creek in order to get to a slab of ice under the bridge, which has got to be even crazier and more dangerous. So our staff assist people all over town with the makings of these rinks, and I urge people to take advantage of that rather than to subject yourselves to the danger. And you know, we've had several accidents across Halton already this winter from people falling into the water and not heeding our advice about how it's not safe on those things. So, Councillor Giddings, thank you very much for the example that you set. And maybe another night I'll come join you in flooding that sucker. But I got to tell you, that's cold work.
It's colder on nights like this. Thank you for coming out. It was great to see you there. You're welcome anytime between 10 and 11:30. And the fellow you mentioned, John, his normal shift is 4:30 a.m. We're flooding it twice a day to keep it in good shape. And you mentioned 16 Mile Creek. I'm sure my council colleagues saw the piece in the Metroland update today. Port Credit, the Credit River is a very popular spot for skating as well, and they did have some skaters go through the ice down near Lakeshore. And so when you've got moving water, it can be incredibly dangerous, and it's something that should be taken very seriously. So thank you very much.
And thank you. It's really work well done. I did not realize there was a 4:30 a.m. shift. Some night when I'm sleepless, maybe I'll go over and give that a try. Councillor Hazlitt-Deal, have you got something?
Wanted to wish a Chinese Happy New Year. Later this week, the new learner starts, and I know that they missed being able to have an event last year. They're going to miss an event this year, but I hope that they are able to celebrate within their households this special time for their families.
Well, thank you for reminding me. Actually, they have a very high-tech virtual celebration planned for their hundreds of members in their residents association. So, there's some good stuff happening there. If there's no one else, then perhaps a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws is listed in the agenda. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Longo, thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, I see no objection. The bylaws are considered and read and adopted. Council, that completes our work. Thank you very much for your diligence and your hard work in preparing for the meeting. And that ends the meeting, and it's been terrific working with you.